right, welcome back. So glad you could join me again for another story about our friend Joseph. We know that Joseph, last week when we talked about Joseph, he'd worked for the Pharaoh. He had a story about the 7 fat cows being eaten by 7 skinny cows. Well, Joseph, after he told the Pharaoh what the dream meant, remember the Pharaoh put him in charge? And they had those 7 years of really good things happening, of everything growing and everything going well. Our story starts here where the 7 years where things didn't grow and there wasn't enough food. So our story kind of takes us back to those brothers of Joseph. The brothers were hungry. Food wasn't growing where they lived either. And they had heard rumor that people in Egypt had enough to eat. In fact, they had extra because they'd planned and they'd saved. So Joseph's father told 10 of his 11 brothers to pack some bags and head to Egypt. These brothers were supposed to go and bring food back, bring grain back so they could make flour. Flour is what I use when I make bread or when I make a cake or when I make pie. I use a lot of flour. It's good food. And so Jacob, that's Joseph's father's name, he said to the boys, he said, I want you to go to Egypt and bring us back something to eat. So they did. And remember, that was a very long trip. They were gone a very long time. And they went all the way to Egypt to buy grain. They were in line for the grain. And remember, Joseph was in charge of handing out the grain, of selling the grain. And he saw these men. They weren't little boys anymore. He saw these men in line, ready to buy grain. But he didn't look the same. You know, when you're a little kid, you grow up and you look like a man. You don't look like that little kid anymore. So Joseph knew who these boys were, or these men were. They weren't boys anymore because they talked like he talked when he was young. And he listened to them. And he knew they were his brothers, but they didn't know who he was. He wasn't dressed like them. He was dressed almost like the king. He wasn't a very important man. He did not look the same. But he didn't tell them. He didn't tell them that he was their brother. He did sell them the grain, though. He sold them enough grain so they could eat for months and months. They took the grain back home. And their father was happy. This is their father, Jacob. He was so happy that they brought the grain home, but they used it all up. Now they were hungry again. What do you think they needed to do? They needed to go back to Egypt. So the men did. They went all the way back to Egypt, and they had to buy grain again from their brother. Remember, they didn't know it was their brother. But this time, Joseph told them the secret. Joseph told them, I will sell you the grain, but I want you to know something. I know you, and you know me. And they're, what? We don't really know you. He says, yes, I am Joseph. Look, he's hugging them. He's showing that he loves them and he forgave them. And he really did forgive them. He knew that God had put him in the position. God had given him the job at Potiphar's house. God had given him the job in prison. And now God had given him the job for the king to store this grain. He knew that God had had a plan all along. And God was using him to save their life, to give them food, to provide food for the whole country of Egypt and even beyond those borders. God used Joseph in many, many ways. And so he told his brothers, I love you and I forgive you. And I want you to bring our father back to me. So you remember this week that God is watching over you and God loves you wherever you go and whatever you do. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.